Has been pre-recorded in Britain for this event by Barry Quirk, and Barry has come out to Australia on several occasions in the last few years, and he's the CEO of Lewisham Council. He's also the chair of the UK Design Commission, and until 2009 was the National Efficiency Champion for local government in Britain, appointed by the national government. He's a leading local government chief executive nationally, and in 2013 he co-authored a comprehensive manifesto for the redesign of public services in Britain. Okay, so now we will be playing this. I said it's been pre-recorded a couple of weeks ago in the UK, and I'm sure you'll find it very beneficial. If you've heard anything about Barry Quirk, he's certainly not backward in coming forward.
Hello. Thank you very much for inviting me to address your conference for the Municipal Association of Victoria. I'm really privileged to be asked to contribute, and I hope what I have to say, is of use to you in your discussions at your conference over the next day or so. I'm going to talk about the local government in the digital age and the challenges this poses to politicians, to public managers, and to organisations as to how we can get ready and get in ahead of the digital challenge of the next 10 to 20 years. First of all, let me tell you about my local challenges in London. I'm the chief executive of a London authority. It serves 295,000 people, very socially diverse and with intense socioeconomic deprivation. Of all the 350 different local authorities in the UK, mine is the 15th most deprived in the whole of England. We're a full service council. That means we provide social care services as well as environmental and housing services to our population. We have a directly elected mayor and we have 54 elected councillors. The total operating budget of my authority is just over £1.1 billion, of which £260 million is our net revenue expenditure on which we're controlled. We've made 90 million savings on our net revenue expenditure in the past 3 years, and we have another 95 million to make over the next 3 years. And therefore cost reduction and making our organisation more efficient is to the forefront of my mind when I'm looking at changes in management arrangements and changes in service and organisation. I'm therefore focused on budget savings through service redesign, on organisational renewal, on the impact of London's economic growth. We're not just reducing costs, we're reducing costs in an environment where the demand for service is growing because our population is growing. We're also looking at how we provide services with our other public service partners, whether that's the police and fire service, or critically for us, the health service, because a third of our expenditure is on adult social care for the elderly and people with disabilities. And the link between health service expenditure locally, hospital expenditure, and our expenditure as a social care authority is very linked. We're also looking at the challenges of child protection, as well as what can we do to contribute towards solving London's housing crisis. So those are the local challenges really that I face in London. I'm aware that the realities that we have and the urban realities and the future challenges are different than those that you face in Australia. 64% of Australians live in your biggest 5 cities of Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth and Adelaide. In Britain, just 11% live in our biggest 5 cities. Now, the significance of that for you in IT terms is that you have extraordinarily strong economic and population clusters, but you also have the highest order spatial or geographic dispersion of population probably anywhere in the world. And this paradox of strong population clusters and higher order dispersion is, I think, a real challenge for you, which I believe the digital era for government enables you to solve in ways that you've been unable to solve in the last 20 years. The other point I would make, which is exceptional about Australia, is the ubiquity of smartphones. In 2005, just 25% of Australians had smartphones. 10 years later, this year, 2015, 85% of Australians have smartphones, even more than is the case in Great Britain, and we have the highest in Europe. Now, why is it that Australians have smartphones? Well, I think there is an advantage that Australians have in relation to their adoption of digital technologies. These advantages stem from the following reasons. First, the iPhone was launched in 2008 and it coincided with the Great Crash. Now, Australians had relative financial security across their household income compared to what was the case in the rest of the developed world. The other point was that all telcos in Australia carried the iPhone, whereas that wasn't the case, for example, in America, where it's really only carried by one or two telcos at most. And finally, there's a large percentage of Australians with family overseas that generate high quality communication demand. This combination of lots of connections overseas, a very wide platform for telecommunications carriers carrying all of the smartphones, really what that's done is driven up your smartphone usage, and that itself has a very big impact on the demands that you'll have for public services going forward. Let's now look at the imperatives for change. We often talk about a burning platform, and normally when we're discussing the issues of a burning platform, we're thinking about the financial crisis that we face in the public sector because of imposed austerity programs by our national governments. The fiscal crisis that my authority faces, which I mentioned recently, is in respect of losing a large chunk of our revenues, 90 million out of 260. But that's not the only burning platform that we face. There's another burning platform, the platform of relevance, because we face in the public sector, and particularly I think in local government, we face the risk of irrelevance, losing connection with our citizens. It's not just losing our revenues that's a problem, it's losing connection with our citizens that's a problem too. I think we need to focus on care services for new needs, new demands, for a baby boomer generation that's getting older more gradually, that's living longer. And we also need to connect and think about core services, services that add value to the places that we represent and that we serve. And it's this blend of care services which are personal, which are about user demands, and core services that are more about place and locality and community, and not just about the preservation of one service in a place. What I've shown here is a photograph of Deptford Lounge in Lewisham. Deptford Lounge it was built by my authority, and it's a facility that provides for primary schooling, a library, an enterprise hub, and it's actually run by a local cultural institution for the community itself. So it's a multi-purpose community hub that focuses on enterprise, not just a library facility. It's working through what core services that we have and how they can add value to places, not just retaining them in their current mode. Now, I think it's worthwhile thinking through what are the purposes of local government. Because if you are looking at the virtual council, virtual local government, what is it we mean? Well, there are three dimensions, three aspects of local government. There's community self-governance, there's the advocacy of place and locality, and there's the role of securing local public services. These three dimensions or purposes of local government are critical: community self-governance, the advocacy of place and locality, and the securing of local public services in that place. And I believe there's potential to transform through technology, community self-governance, the advocacy of place, and the securing of local public service. And we need to think through how we're going to apply digital approaches to each of these dimensions. Let us think through what the implications are in relation to governance itself. There are four aspects of this. There's representative governance. People are elected to represent a locality and make public interest choices and decisions for that locality. How can we use digital technologies to improve and involve our representatives in the full civic life of the locality? How can they use social media to connect to people more readily? There's also the aspects of direct democracy. Can we use virtual approaches, digital approaches, to enable people to vote on issues, to respond to issues, to consult on issues more readily through direct contact? But in addition to that, we can think about the deliberative approach to governance. How can we encourage communities to have discussions amongst themselves? Can we establish social media platforms to enable local communities to discuss issues locally outside of the walls and confines of the local council and on their own terms? And finally, there's the associative approach to democracy, one which is a bottom-up approach, more about civil society at the local level, local associations. How can we use digital approaches to establish networks of connections between local civil societies that are working for the public good in a locality? Let me give you some issues about that. The virtual council, I think, is one that is light touch and is characterised by ease of engagement for citizens. It's about the community being deliberative with each other and discussing and having discussions about local issues. It's not just about voting. Harlan Cleveland, the American public administration theorist, said that the challenge for public leaders in the 21st century would be how to get everyone in on the act and still get action. I think that's the challenge for the virtual council, for digital approaches. How do we get everyone in on the act and yet still get action, rather than to be just paralysed through discussion? I'm now going to show you the results of a study that was done in Australia on different generational approaches to involvement in politics. The different generations are what are known as builders, baby boomers, Generation X and Generation Y. And what the study tried to look at was people's perception of how effective they felt different tools and approaches were for achieving political change currently in Australia. What this shows is that there's really no generational difference in the belief in social media and politics. Only 1 in 10 of respondents believe that online forums were useful for a tool for achieving political change, or that Twitter was a useful tool, or that social networking sites, or that video sharing sites, or online advocacy groups. In other words, we are at an emergent early stage in the use of social media, and there's no greater adoption by Generation Y or Generation X cohorts in Australia than there is indeed amongst the baby boomers or the builder generation within Australia. So it's no good believing that actually young people will take the agenda forward. Everyone needs to take this agenda forward. But at the moment, social media is at an early phase in its utility for political change and political involvement. So let's not be carried away by its capabilities at this time. Let's think about its potential for the future. Here are some examples of online local networks in the authority that I'm in South East London. There's Brockley Central blog, which is a blog for people that live in an area called Brockley in South East London. Then there's the Deptford Dame, which is an online blog for people that live in Deptford. Finally, there's a blog for people that live in the Blackheath area called the Blackheath Bugle. These are local blogs, online community blogs, about what's of interest and importance to people in the locality that they live. These localities are much smaller than the local area that's the local council, the whole of Lewisham, which is 295,000 people. Generally, these areas are areas for about 5 to 10,000 in our parts of London. And what my local authority does is it tries to connect with these local online networks and encourage them and encourage connections between them. Now I want to move to the issues for organisational challenges for local government in taking forward the digital agenda, in making a reality of the virtual council. I think you've got to start from the power of inertia and the real challenge that we have in local government, because most of our money is spent on information and communication technology, which is locked into the cost of our infrastructure, the cost of hardware replacement, as well as very high software licensing costs. Many authorities will have very many systems. In my own authority, we have at least 300 business systems, separate business systems. We now, though, need to have much more creative use of technology to transform our services and not just sustain and improve existing systems. Mostly, we are looking at improving the system that we've got, and we're locked into that system and the problems about changing it. What the computer market does when it looks at local government is it sees a very fragmented market for IT. In the Municipal Association of Victoria, you have about 79, I think, different local authorities, and your IT market doesn't just look to the market within Victoria. It looks across Australia, if not internationally. It therefore is looking at quite a fragmented market. What this does is it raises costs for private sector to develop products and sell products. There are few good off-the-shelf solutions, and so councils build bespoke IT systems. They can't find a system that will meet their immediate demands, and so they build one which is tailored to them. The trouble is, when you're buying something which is bespoke and tailored to you, you have to pay bespoke and tailored prices. There's then vendor lock-in as the data is recorded differently in each different system. This results, therefore, in councils having their unique IT architecture. This balloons the costs of IT in local government. An analysis of UK local government shows that they spend 6% of their operating costs on information technology. In my own authority, we spend £10 million a year on IT, of which at least £9.5 million is locked in cost, in the cost of the infrastructure, the platform, the server costs, the IT outsourcing costs, as well as the software licensing costs. Now, by comparison, global industries spend between 1 to 4% of their costs on IT. Therefore, local councils in the UK are spending really a 2% premium, probably 50% more than they need to or ought to, on information technology. This is because of the differentiated, fragmented nature of the market. We need to understand that market if we are to really make reality of digital virtual approaches. When we are looking at our systems, whether those systems are for the environment or for care, we're looking at virtual approaches because we want to digitise, and there becomes an advantage in digitising and moving to open standards. But when we're looking at digitising things, we're looking at digitising so that we can analyse, so that we can predict. Most of what we get from computer systems is business intelligence. Business intelligence really tells us what happened in the past, whether that's in a child protection system or an environmental maintenance system or a housing system or whatever system it is. The business intelligence is patterns about what happened. What we're looking for in a virtual or digital system is not what happened, but why it happened or what's likely to happen next. In other words, we want to move from business intelligence about our business to predictive analytics about the demands for our business, so that we can make a real return on our investment in IT. Because if we're able to work out what's likely to happen next, we're likely to be able to reduce our costs in providing services for the next thing, rather than just focus on the past. Now, there is a sort of paradox with digital systems. Digital systems centralise through compliance and controls, and they also enable decentralisation through network effects. And it's these network effects that give us the transformative capability in relation to our service. I would say it's both network effects and speed of change, which is the biggest and important impact that we make in virtual councils. Let's look just at the issue of speed. Think about your phone on steroids. Now, in 2004, when the mobile generation was 3G, the speed of connection was in 500 milliseconds. The data rates per second were 100 megabytes. So you were downloading 100 megabytes per second, and you were connecting at 500 milliseconds on your phone. In 2014, with 4G, the speed has reduced from 500 milliseconds to 50, and the data rates per second have gone from 100 megabytes to 1 gigabyte. By 2020, the mobile generation will go from 4G to 5G. The connection will be from 50 milliseconds to 1 millisecond, and the data rate download will be 10 gigabytes. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, the significance is that 4G is simply not quick enough for instantaneous connection, for emergencies, for immediate language translation, and for performing life-saving operations where you need real-time connection. You need data speeds at least 1 gigabyte in order for there to be real connection. And when you have UHD television and ultra-high definition downloads, that will be when we move from the sort of buffered connections that we get with 3G to a sort of better but sometimes buffered connection on 4G to a connection on 5G, which is genuinely dynamic, real-time and ultra-high definition. Now, when 100% of your citizens have ultra-high definition download on their smartphones in just 5 years' time, this will be a transformative requirement and demand for services from you. You will need to be planning now to respond to this demand, not just planning to respond to the demands of the last 5 years. And when you add this demand for speed and quality to the network effects that arise as a result of connections, the interdependencies, the scaling effects that's dominant, then you'll realise that actually the virtual demands that you've got aren't just from your citizens, but from all citizens, aren't just from the businesses locally, but from all businesses, aren't just from local residents, but potentially from visitors, from others. You essentially will be establishing an open platform connection to a wider world, not just to your residents. Let me come to the conclusion of what I'm saying here by referring to two different things. The first thing I want to refer to is a concept in design about utility. And the second is an idea really about the importance of virtual councils. So let's now look at this first idea from design. Designers talk about the difference between functional utility and emotional utility. Functional utility of a product or a service is essentially, how does it work? Does it work? Does it work more effectively, more intuitively than another product or service? The emotional utility of a product or a service is, how does it make me feel once I've used that product or service? And I believe that local government needs to move much more to emotional utility. When our citizens use our services, how does it make them feel? Does it empower them? Do they feel happier? Or are they just frustrated? Public services should exude empathy to the public, to the service users, to citizens. It should exude a sense of other, a sense of care. We should design empathy and emotional utility into our services. So we're not just making services seamless or transparent or open, we're making them so that they add value to people's lives, so that they, in a sense, understand more about one another and engage more with the civic and the civil. In a sense, the last 50 years has been about consumers connecting with their products and their services. We want citizens to connect with councils and to have a good sense of their engagement with their council, not for that sense to be negative. The second idea really is about virtual councils being not just local platforms for people to connect to one another, not just enabling the reduction of cost of local government, not just enabling councils to connect and share services with each other, but actually for councils to be more open and connected, for local businesses and local people, local civic organisations to be more open and connected to the wider world of Australia and the wider world more generally. The purpose of being virtual and open is that one's not closed and parochial. I think you need to think about the 5-year-olds that you have, that you know of in your place, in your family, in your wider family. Do you know of a 5-year-old? That 5-year-old will be 85 in 2095. That's an incredible thought. You think of your own lifetime, think of the changes that have happened in technology, in service and in government, and now think of that 5-year-old. What are the likely changes that will happen over the next 80 years? It's very likely, isn't it, that local government, the public service, the products, the technology will be vastly different in 2095 to what it is now. What your 5-year-old will have to live through, the changes that they will have to live through, will be immense. We have to enable our young people to be ready, to be adaptive, to be resilient for change in the future. We don't ourselves need to focus just on our councils, our organisations and our services, but more so on the public that we serve. But my final message to you is that too many councils focused almost entirely on the front face of government, rather than the processes that lie behind them. They want their appearance to be good to their public. You can only reduce costs, you can only make savings if the services are redesigned from top to bottom, including their internal processes. Don't just change the front end, the front face to the consumer, change everything. Digital government cannot be about bolting new technology onto old ways of doing things. That simply won't work. We need to make more substantial change than that. I know that you've got a very strong agenda in Australia, and you in Victoria are ahead of that agenda. I really hope that you're able to make a massive step forward over the next day or so in discussing how you can make real and create the benefits for your communities, your society, out of virtual and digital working in what will be the next phase of digital era government. Thank you and good wishes.